Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs. This course was prepared by Jack Lanius.
Hello everyone, I'm Sean Reeves. I'm an Associate Certified Entomologist with American Pest CEUs, and I've been in the pest management industry since 1999. I'll be your instructor for today's course.
The Lowdown on IPM. This course is an in-depth look at IPM. IPM does not necessarily mean that pesticides cannot be used. However, any use of pesticides must be consistent with the goals of IPM. Through sanitation, exclusion, plant-resistant varieties, cultural practices, and mechanical means, reliance on pesticides may be reduced in many instances. When looking at the lowdown on IPM, this can be accomplished by use of baits and bait containers, pheromones, and applications to protected areas, crack and crevice, wall voids, subslab, etc. Exposure to pesticides can be lessened when pesticides are the control method of choice. When looking at the lowdown on IPM, you need to know IPM techniques, i.e. monitoring, action thresholds, targeting at certain stages of a pest life cycle, and using a combination of compatible control methods. Let's take a look at the definition of integrated pest management. Definition of integrated pest management, IPM, means providing effective pest control while decreasing the exposure of customers and the environment to pesticides through least toxic alternatives and integrated pest management principles. IPM does not necessarily mean that pesticides cannot be used. However, any use of pesticides must be consistent with the goals of IPM through sanitation, exclusion, planting resistant varieties, cultural practices, and mechanical means. Reliance on pesticides may be reduced in some instances. By use of baits and bait containers, pheromones, and applications to protected areas, crack and crevice, wall voids, subslab, etc., exposure to pesticides can be lessened. When pesticides are the control method of choice, IPM techniques, i.e. monitoring, action thresholds, targeting at certain stages of a pest life cycle, and using a combination of compatible control methods. Looking deeper into integrated pest management, integrated pest management may include appropriately labeled pesticides when necessary to control a pest and when allowed by the customers. However, emphasis should be placed on minimizing the reliance on pesticides. Also, if pesticides are to be used, application techniques and choice of products should contribute to reducing human and environmental contact with pesticides. Further into integrated pest management, a holistic approach to the pest problem is required. This involves both the applicator and the customer. As a pest control professional, you possess knowledge of pest biology and control methods. IPM provides you with a great opportunity to put that expertise at work. This is an opportunity to be paid and appreciated for your ingenuity in solving pest problems and not just for what comes out of a spray nozzle. When we look at an integrated pest management approach, this approach requires greater labor input in terms of inspections and reports. It also requires better communication with the customer and a partnership with the customer for successful implementation. First, let's look at a site inspection. A site inspection is the first step in the IPM process, regardless of the category or categories of pest control involved. The site inspection is conducted prior to pest control treatments and serves several functions. 1. It establishes presence or absence of pest on the site. 2. Provides an inventory of conditions conducive to infestations. And 3. Gives the applicator a basis for developing site-specific recommendations for pest control alternatives. When thinking about the site inspection, it's important to note that though some pests may occasionally invade, they do not continue to live and reproduce in the environments that do not meet their needs. Therefore, IPM inspections should focus on the conditions of a site that make it hospitable to pests. For indoor pests, conditions to consider include food sources, lighting, moisture, furnishings in the building, harborage, routes of invasion, temperature, conditions outside the structure, air circulation, and storage areas. For pests such as roaches, ants, and flies, inspect for conditions such as exposed food, open vents or fireplace flues, food scraps and grease on and under appliances, structural damage creating openings to the building, food improperly stored in cabinets with access for pets, improper storage, leaking plumbing, sweating pipes, dripping air conditioner units, and pet water dishes, shrubbery, flower beds, trees, or mulch up against the building, poorly fitting doors and windows. Think about a situation like you're seeing in the attached image. Look at all the food on this countertop. These people are really not trying to clean up at all, and it's going to be futile as a pest control professional for you to try to come in and fix this problem on your own. You need to make sure that they understand up front with this type of exposed food, leaving it out, sometimes for days at a time, you're going to have major problems with cockroaches and ants that really can't be solved by a pest management professional. Especially when you consider that we're going to do a lot of baiting. How are we going to bait for roaches when food's left out everywhere like this? The competing food sources between the bait and the food would never work out. Most likely they would just continue to feed on the food they've been feeding on. Once this is cleaned up and we put our baits out, there's a lot better chance of success that we could go ahead and get rid of the roaches with the baits. Now think about this scenario. Look at this clean commercial kitchen. As you can see, this place is almost spotless. There's no food on the countertops. All the mixing equipment's cleaned up. Everything's in order. You can even see under the shelves, all products are stored correctly inside sealed containers. As you can imagine, this is an account we've worked on for years, and we've never seen a roach in this account. So you have to remember that sanitation and that customer effort made all the difference in assisting us as the pest control company and making sure they never get an insect infestation. Check out the attached photos. As you can see on the left, we've got a leaky pipe in a crawl space. It's pretty easy to understand how we would have problems with things like millipedes and centipedes and other insects that require a lot of moisture when you've got a constant drip from a pipe. On the right, you can see where gutters are spraying up against the foundation of this home. They're just putting a ton of moisture right on that foundation. So, of course, in periods of drought, ants and things are going to be attracted to that area. But also think about things like termites. It wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination at all to think that termites would flock to an area like this, especially considering the fact, like all insects, they need moisture to survive, and no matter what's going on with the weather, there's always going to be moisture right against that foundation. It only makes sense that the customer would want the leaking pipe fixed. There's no need for a leaking pipe to be in their crawl space, and it's not going to lead to anything good for their home. And when it comes to the excessive moisture from the sprinklers, I would think of it like this. Maybe as a pest control company, maybe you work on sprinkler systems, or the customer again can either do it themselves or have somebody take care of them and direct the sprinklers to a better area where they're not throwing that much water against the foundation. For pests such as roaches, ants, flies, inspect for conditions such as dead air spaces in a house or attic, open doors and windows without screens, rotting boards and mildew, screens in need of repair, droppings or fly specks, openings around pipes and wires leading into buildings, live or dead pests, open drains or sewer pipes, roach egg cases in protected areas. Inspect for rodents with special attention given to live or dead rats or mice, open drains or sewer pipes, droppings, open vents or fireplace flues, gnawing damage, structural damage creating openings to the building, trails or grease spots along walls or rafters, improper storage, noises in attics or walls, shrubbery, flower beds, trees, or mulch up against the building. Inspect for rodents with special attention given to odor, exposed food, open doors, food scraps and grease on and under appliances, openings to crawl space not screened, food improperly stored in cabinets with access for pests, openings around pipes and wires leading into buildings, leaking plumbing, dripping air conditioner units, and pet water dishes. Think about something as simple as this rodent entry point. This is a very easy rodent entry point. We've got an elevation change on a tile roof, and there's a huge gap where rats were going right in and out of this attic. So as you can see, These issues really need to be done with exclusion and things like that. It's not always about putting out a pesticide or a rodenticide. A lot of times it's more about doing exclusion or changing the habitat to make sure that they don't have an easy entry point or they don't have a good food source. An opening like this, I don't care how many rodenticides you use, you can still have a major problem with rats because they may not necessarily eat the rodenticides, and also they're going to have too much access in and out, and if they find other food sources, they can just store it up in that attic area anyways. For fleas and ticks, look for presence of pets, inspect for fleas and ticks, condition of sheets and other bedding, pet bedding, sleeping resting areas, dirty floors and rugs, access to structure and yard by rats, squirrels, raccoons, and other wildlife, upholstered furniture, rodent nest, fleas around lights or windows, children that may be prone to bring fleas into the house. For spiders, scorpions, and centipedes, inspect for webs or spider egg cases in corners or under furniture and appliances, open vents or fireplace flues, poorly fitting doors and windows, structural damage creating openings to the building, open doors and windows without screens, improper storage, screens in need of repair, shrubbery, flower beds, trees or mulch up against the building, openings around pipes and wires leading into buildings, presence of insects and other arthropods that provide a food source. For wood-destroying insects, termites, wood-boring beetles, carpenter worms, and carpenter ants, inspect for foraging carpenter ants, wood contact with the ground, frass, excessive moisture, fecal pellets, rotten wood, kick holes, soil too high on foundation or on walls of building, exit holes, planter boxes, wood fences, wood piles, debris or woody vegetation in contact with the building, mud tubes, form boards left in place, buckled paint, insufficient ventilation. For outdoor pest and plant diseases, consider presence of pests or diseases, slope, food sources, exposure, north, south, east, and west, species, life stages, and condition of ornamental plants and turf, adjacent land uses, soil type and depth, lighting, maintenance practices, mowing, mulching, trimming, fertilization, etc., routes of invasion, water and moisture, droppings, and cover. For weeds, consider variety of weeds, shading, holes in turf, slope, soil type and depth, exposure, north, south, east, and west, drainage, adjacent land use and seed sources, species of turf and ornamental plants, type and amount of traffic, maintenance practices, mowing, mulching, trimming, fertilization, etc., and previous land use. Let's talk about pest identification. Pest identification is much more crucial for effective implementation of an IPM program than for conventional pest control where broad-spectrum pesticides can be used to kill a wide variety of pests. IPM program goals require that pesticide use be as selective as possible. This requires both identification of the species of the pest and major areas of pest activity. An often overlooked part of IPM is customer education. IPM can only be partially successful, if at all, without the cooperation of the customer. The IPM provider must educate the customer about conditions conducive to pest survival and infestations and steps to alleviate such conditions. The customer must be provided with non-chemical alternatives for addressing pest problems. When we think about customer education, some of these alternatives may be beyond the purview or capabilities of the IPM provider. Working with the customer, the applicator should devise a plan that eliminates or minimizes pesticide exposure while still providing an acceptable level of control. Be realistic about the probability of success. Pest management objectives. Establishing pest management objectives should be by mutual agreement between the applicator and the customer. The objectives can vary between various areas and for different pests. A food processing establishment may have an objective of no pest in the food preparation and warehouse areas. A homeowner may not tolerate rats and mice, but accept low levels of certain insects in the house. Another very important part of IPM is the fact that we need to set action thresholds. Action thresholds are levels of pest infestation at which some control measure or measures is implemented. To conserve resources, limit exposure, and reduce environmental impact, it is sometimes desirable to tolerate some level of pest infestation. For indoor treatments, tolerance may be very low and based on regulatory or aesthetic reasons. So what's our thinking process to set action thresholds? Where possible, use scientifically determined thresholds. An example is treatment for grubs and turf when the density reaches an average of 4 to 6 grubs per square foot. Trees generally begin using starch reserves when defoliation reaches 25%. However, surveys of aesthetic perceptions indicate a threshold of 10% or less damage. I would say nothing's more important than reducing human exposures. Human exposure to pesticides can be accomplished by using 1. Non-chemical pest management techniques, 2. Using application techniques and products that limit the probability of human contact. 1. Non-chemical control techniques. Non-chemical control techniques include methods to exclude pests, environmental modification, introduction of natural predators, mechanical removal, and vacuuming. Next, we're going to take a look at sanitation. Sanitation is one of the best ways to help control pests when thinking about IPM. Sanitation, as used in regard to pest control, includes the removal of food, water, and harborage conducive to pest invasion or survival. Sanitation. This includes measures such as cleaning up food scraps in food preparation areas, vacuuming regularly, storing food in pest-proof containers, cleaning sink traps, stopping plumbing leaks, removing dense foliage against buildings, removing piles of debris, limbs, leaves, and rotting vegetation, removing diseased plants and dead limbs, removing animal droppings, eliminating standing water, removing pet food after feeding. Let's think about something as simple as vacuuming carpets. Vacuuming carpets before a flea treatment can remove 32 to 90% of eggs, 15 to 50% of larvae, over 63% of pupa, and 95% of emerged adults. Efficacy of the treatment is going to be much better if we do this vacuuming first. Another great thing about vacuuming is vacuuming lifts up the carpet fibers so insecticides can penetrate deeper into the matrix, making them more effective. So once again, something as simple as vacuuming is really going to enhance our treatment and is a great step in IPM principles. Looking at our next step, exclusion. Exclusion is eliminating entrance to a building or area. As you can see in the photo, rodents, insects, and potentially even larger animals have easy access to get underneath this home. Exclusion techniques include caulking or filling cracks and crevices, fencing, keeping windows and doors closed, metal plates and shields, outward opening screen doors, chimney caps, air curtains, bird spikes, screens on windows and vents, paint, weather stripping on doors, inspection of incoming items to prevent importing pests, and grates on drains. Looking again at this home, there was another area of concern that I saw. There's some electrical boxes. They've got some open areas right up underneath. There's some nice big gaps here. I think this would be really smart to seal with something like silicone so that the insects can't have harborage. I don't really think putting a pesticide in there makes as much sense because you can seal something like that up with silicone and save yourself the time and trouble of having to worry about why you're not solving the insect problem on the home. As we talk about exclusion techniques, take for instance the image you're looking at. Here, people put pipes through the stucco foundation, but they made the holes much larger than the pipes. It's real easy to understand that rodents, insects, and other things can get right through these areas. So an exclusion technique as simple as using silicone would be a great idea in this area. But as you can imagine, no matter how hard we try with insecticides or rodenticides outside, I don't think we can solve this problem without using an exclusion technique to seal up the area and basically cut their entry off. Talking more about this home we're doing an inspection on, one thing I noticed too was where the soffit vent meets, there's a big gap right between the soffit vent and the stucco. You know, these are great areas to do exclusion work with caulk or silicone because once you seal up areas like that, you're really going to do well to keep the insects out. Can you seal up every little inch of the property? No. But think about it as a company. This is an extra service you can provide that's needed by the homeowner, and you can help keep the insects out. To me, it's a no-brainer to offer services like this because it fits right in with our IPM programs. Talking about exclusion, one thing you would look at is something like this snowflake block. This was on the foundation of a manufactured home. It's wide open. There's nothing stopping anything from getting through these holes. As you can see here, we've got 3 holes that are wide open. So if we don't provide exclusion on something like this, once again, we're never going to solve a problem with rodents or whatever the case may be. At this point, we would just put a hardware cloth over it, which I'll show you in the next image, but I think hardware cloth is a good way to exclude big openings like this. You could also use sheet metal if the openings are on different types of structures, different areas where you don't need air movement to come through, but definitely like a crawl space where you need air movement, hardware cloth is going to be the best way to exclude these areas. Looking back at what we showed you in the previous slide, we actually went over those open snowflake block openings with hardware cloth. As you can see here, we used an interesting pattern. We did 3 concrete screws down each side of the block and 1 in the center, and we found this anchored the hardware cloth really well to the block. You have to make sure when you're doing this you don't drill too closely to the edges or you can crack the block. But I can tell you we had probably 70 or 80 blocks on this home. We didn't crack any blocks. We were able to use a concrete bit, put the concrete screws in, and this exclusion came out very nicely. Low exposure pesticide applications. Of greater concern to the applicator and public safety should be the no observable effect level, NOEL, and the level at which mortality begins. These may be much lower than the LD50 or LC50 values for many individuals. Additionally, most of the toxicity data available is from animals other than humans, and toxicity can vary considerably between species. Formulated products may be more or less toxic depending on the nature of inert ingredients, solvents, synergists, etc. in the product. Consult the safety data sheet, SDS, and the manufacturer label for product-specific information. In judging the toxicity of a product, applicators need to look at the amount of toxicant in the product. The poison is in the dose. Anticoagulant rodenticides are among the most toxic materials in common usage, but the amount of actual poison in the bait formulations is very small, frequently 0.05 to 0.005%. Consult the SDS for pesticide-specific information. For products that you will dilute with water and apply as a spray, calculate the toxicity of the finished product to present a more accurate picture of the material being applied. To find the LD50 value for a pesticide spray mix in water containing 0.5% of an active ingredient with the LD50 of 200 mg/kg, multiply 200 mg/kg by 100 divided by 0.5. 200 mg/kg times 100 equals 200 mg/kg times 200, and that's 40,000 mg/kg, 0.5. There are additional considerations other than direct mortality, such as speed of action, reversibility, is there an effective antidote or treatment, any irreversible injuries such as kidney damage, nervous system disorders, ulcerations of the cornea, and carcinogenic, mutagenic, teratogenic effects. The routes of entry, dermal, inhalation, and ingestion for a pesticide are of primary concern. Avoiding ingestion is a relatively easy task with proper hygiene. Other things being equal, products that can be absorbed through the skin are more likely to enter the applicator's body, even with protective clothing. Fumigants, fogs, and fine dust are more likely to be inhaled or evade exclusion by clothing and protective equipment. Pesticides that are not readily absorbed through intact skin may be rapidly absorbed through cuts or abrasions. Considerations and formulations involve a number of factors, including 1. The concentration of the toxic agent or agents, 2. Inclusion of synergists, 3. Solvents that may increase absorption, 4. physical state of product, liquid, gas, solid, paste, particle size of dust. 5. Stability, especially propensity to vaporize. 6. Mixing requirements, if any. 7. The treatment surface. Probability of exposure, i.e., contact with a pesticide, involves a combination of factors previously discussed, as well as the equipment used and mixer, loader, applicator procedures. However, the use of products that are low concentrations, solids that do not vaporize, ready to use, and not absorb through the skin, minimize probability of exposure. Exposure is most likely with fumigants, vapors, fogs, fine mist, and dust that can be absorbed through the skin and inhaled. Let's talk about timing of applications. The biology of the target pest and human activities both need to be considered in planning pest management operations. Sometimes the best time to make an application does not conform with normal working hours. Sometimes a compromise must be struck between the best time to reach the target species and avoiding human contact. With timing of applications, if pesticide application is the control method of choice, make your selection based on the environmental impact and relative safety of using various products. As with an applicator, you can come into contact with higher concentration products and increase dermal and inhalation risk. With timing of applications, it's important that you also consider that you may be returning to the sites of your previous applications, including protected environments such as crawl spaces, attics, etc., where degradation of pesticides may be extremely slow. Short residual pesticides. Pesticides with short lives in the environment lessen the chances for exposure. In addition to chemical properties of the pesticide, protection from the elements, volatility, moisture, bacterial action, temperature, soil and water pH, and sunlight are important factors in pesticide persistence. Indoor treatments will generally result in greater persistence. Baits and bait boxes. Baits including food, scent, and pheromone baits can aid in targeting pests and reducing non-target take. Bait boxes can further protect the environment, non-targets, and humans from contact with pesticides. There are a number of effective rodent food baits for use in bait boxes. Baits and bait boxes. Baits for outdoor or moist environments are made of wax blocks. Food and scent baits are used for trapping various small mammals in live or killing traps. The choice of bait can greatly influence the species taken. Food baits are used for bird control with pesticides and tarps. Baits and bait boxes. Food and pheromone baits are used for various insects in combination with traps, glue boards, insect growth regulators (IGR), and toxicants. Crack and crevice treatments. Bait sprays and dust can be placed out of areas of normal human contact by deposition in structural cracks and crevices. Not only does this reduce probability of contact, but it also places pesticides in locations where many small pests seek harborage. It may be necessary in some instances to drill into voids, in walls, or under cabinets to place pesticides where insects are hiding. By strategically placing pesticides, greater contact with pests can be realized while reducing the total amount of pesticides used. Let's take a look at an example of a simple crack and crevice treatment. In the case you can see here, we're treating with a roach bait out of a syringe. Got the syringe needle going in the crack and crevice. This is where the cabinet meets the wall below the countertop. As many of you know, roaches like to feed in these areas anyway. They like to be protected. So this is a great area where you can do a bait service with a crack and crevice treatment. We don't have to worry about any children, pets, or anything like that coming into contact or getting in the product. Let's talk about perimeter treatments. Perimeter treatments are band applications of pesticide around the outer boundaries of an area or along the foundation of buildings. The purpose is to provide a barrier to prevent pest invasion or reinvasion. Perimeter treatments can reduce the need for pest control inside the area where human exposure is more likely to occur. I think the logic on perimeter treatments makes sense to everyone nowadays in the pest control industry. As you can imagine, it's always going to be a lot better to put the products outside for a lot of reasons, not just the exposure. Obviously, this is where the insects come from, so a lot of people are out letting their customers know Once I put this product outside, it's going to help stop the insects before they get in. Things like baits, they're obviously going to draw the insects in. They're going to feed on the base. It's really going to help reduce the populations outside. So I'm a big believer in perimeter treatments. I also know that you can't ignore the indoors. I've seen it go both ways. If there is a problem indoors like German cockroaches, you definitely have to make sure you go in and take care of that problem. And then you may be able to do perimeter treatments in the future, just trying to prevent any new pest reinfestation. One other thing I want to mention about this home we're at, it's on a canal. So as you can see, you got these buckets of water we talked about earlier, but we also got this brackish canal out here. So you can imagine there's a lot of different issues. You could have mosquito problems out there, but also you got to think when you do your treatments, how far away is the water? What is the label of the product? Because keep in mind, when it rains, where is the product going to go? It's obviously going to go down towards the water. So you really have to think, what does the label say? Where can I applicate? How much of the product do I use? Because you've got a whole nother issue of polluting waters if you're not careful. Structure and uses of the building greatly affect management strategies and methods. Some examples of possible IPM strategies for indoor pests are as follows. Ants. Survey for the presence of ants. Use of several types of baits may be useful. Seal cracks where ants may be entering the structure. Store food in ant-proof containers. Improve cleanup after food preparation and meals. Clean stove and appliances. Do not leave pet food out. Always carefully inspect any potted plants brought inside. Use baits containing an IGR or boric acid until ants disappear. When we talk about surveying for the presence of ants, I always like to look and see what the house looks like when I pull up. I always like to think about things like the palm trees you see here. I look at the grass, I see how wet it is. I don't know if you can tell in this photo, but actually this ground was really wet, and you can see like the stains on the sidewalk where the water comes down. So the sprinklers were running a lot, it had been raining a lot. So I already had an idea there could be a big presence of ants. But once again, you take into account what you see when you pull up and start getting an idea of what you think you need to inspect to find out if there's ants or not. This was an interesting inspection we did on a home. We were having a problem with white-footed ants coming through a back window, and we noticed that the home was on a lake and there was a big palm tree in the back. And I started searching, I started looking, and I saw this trail kind of coming way out from the back of the yard. So I go out, I get out by the palm tree, and I start zooming in, and I'm looking through my camera. Next thing I know, I see ants running up and down the tree. Once again, doing a good inspection, going out to those areas, looking to see what you find is a great idea, because those ants were running from the palm tree, they were running along the seawall. They were just all over this property. And that's another thing that helps you out too. When you go out and you search out these areas, you can also find the main source of the ants and really change up on how you treat them. How much easier is it to treat ants if you know exactly where they're coming from than just looking at, oh, they're coming through a windowsill or a window frame. Oh, the ants must be right here. When in reality, they were going across this whole yard. They were actually following an extension cord out to the dock over the seawall and to that palm tree. And as you can see here, we were just going right along their trail all the way back up to the brick pavers at the back of the house to where they were going in the structure. So I thought this was a good one to show just how far the ants can trail and how you can actually find their nest if you go far enough. Let's talk about cockroaches. Place glue traps in strategic locations under furniture to survey roaches. Consider boric acid, diatomaceous earth, or boron dust placement in voids, in walls, and under cabinets. Conduct regular inspections for conditions conducive to roach infestation. Fleas. Survey for presence of fleas in the house. Inspect pets. Vacuum carpets and furniture before treatment and regularly thereafter. Place pets on a maintenance program for flea control. Wash pet bedding. Treat house with low toxicity contact and IGR pesticide for adults and larvae. Confine outdoor treatments to shaded areas. If the grass is tall, it should be mowed prior to treatment. Fleas. Apply residual insect growth regulator in house to control new hatch. Place light trap for fleas in areas where pets sleep. Reinspect in 30 to 60 days to assess need for further action. If pets go outside, also inspect the yard, under porches, kennels, etc., and treat hot spots with low toxicity contact pesticides. Please do not breed in direct sunlight. Inspect shaded areas. Houseflies. Repair or install screens. Keep doors closed. Install air door over inside doorways. Remove breeding sites. Locate trash cans or dumpsters away from building. Ensure that exterior lighting does not attract flies. Use light traps inside the building where flies will not be attracted into the building, out of sight from windows and doors. When we talk about houseflies and integrated pest management, it's important to note areas like you're seeing here. So this is a home that we inspected that you've seen a lot of photos of throughout this training. This home had garbage cans with the lids lifted up. So you can see the houseflies have pretty easy access to get right in the garbage can. They have a nice food source. They have a breeding area. This garbage can had been sitting out for a long time as well. We could tell it had water in it. The people kind of had abandoned it. My point is that you have to look for areas like this, and you have to try to correct these types of conditions when you're thinking about an integrated pest management process. If you tried fly baits and you tried different things like that, and you got a garbage can like this wide open, you're really defeating the purpose of putting out the pesticide if you don't fix a condition like this, because that's really the key to controlling most insects, is really the combination of cleaning up the area, making sure you modify the habitat, sanitation, and also taking care of things like you're seeing here. Let's talk about mosquitoes. IPM techniques for mosquitoes include source reduction, surveillance, control of mosquito larvae and pupa, control of adult mosquitoes. When we talk about mosquito source reduction, that would include things like managing water drainage areas such as culverts, drainage ditches, and storm drains, making sure gutters are not clogged and have proper drainage, checking around residential properties for things such as bird baths, wheelbarrows, buckets, and any other things that can hold water, organizations such as a homeowners association hosting cleanup drives to remove any containers that may be collecting water. It also can include things like making sure there's proper grading on a property. If you don't have good drainage when it's raining heavy, as you can imagine, you're going to have areas of standing water. And habitat modification. So there's a lot of information we could look at here. I can't really go over everything that could hold water. Sometimes it's like little sand pails that kids have in sandboxes. I've seen things as small as bottle caps turned upside down that can hold water. So you really have to do a good thorough inspection. You really have to look all around the property for things that could hold water, because if you don't, you're going to miss something, and it doesn't take much water at all for mosquitoes to breed. How's this for a mosquito breeding ground? We were looking at this home doing a service, and we noticed this huge planter full of stagnant water. Can you imagine the amount of mosquitoes that could breed in something like this? I can tell you for sure, no matter how many pesticides you put out, adulticides for mosquitoes, whatever the case may be, if you don't solve the issue of this major breeding ground, once again, you're never going to stop the mosquito control problem. Or how about this area of wet, decaying leaves near the foundation? We noticed this area was retaining water as well. So of course we're talking about mosquitoes, and we know they could breed in an area like this, but think about all the other insects, millipedes, centipedes, cockroaches. I mean, there's just so many things that can breed and live in an area like this that you've got to solve this before you're ever going to solve the pest problem. Another step in an IPM program for mosquitoes would be mosquito surveillance. These activities can include finding and monitoring places where mosquitoes lay eggs. The larvae that hatch from these eggs are found in the same places. Tracking mosquito populations and the viruses they may be spreading. Monitoring birds to gather data on bird mortality and exposure to West Nile virus. Determining if Environmental Protection Agency EPA registered insecticides will be effective. And there's a couple things I want to mention here. Obviously, you're going to be looking at areas where mosquitoes can have harborage, where they can be laying eggs and things like that. There's a lot of reports that are put out by local and the federal governments where they track mosquitoes, where they talk about the populations and the spread of disease. So I think that's the best way. I don't think a lot of you in the general pest industry are doing mosquito tracking and surveilling populations. But once again, use the knowledge around you, use the government resources that are going out and they're coming up with these things for you. It's just going to really help you out understand where the mosquito population is in your area, as well as you can educate your customers on, hey, right now we're having a problem in the area. There has been some West Nile virus, and we do have some solutions to help control mosquitoes in and around your property. Our next step, still looking at the control of mosquito larvae and pupa, that would involve things like physical controls, such as screens on rain barrels, mechanical controls, such as using acoustic energy to kill larvae, bacterial larvicides, bacillus, thuringiensis, subspecies, Israeliensis BTI, Lyscinobacillus sphaericus, spinosad, insect growth regulators, oils, and films. So once again, some people will get into the control of larvae and pupa. I think this is not a really common thing for general pest control operators, but it's something you can look into. I would just mention to be very careful. There's a lot of laws that go along with these types of products. You need to be really careful that you don't poison waterways or over-applicate, because this can turn into a really big deal for you. So just be careful with those types of things, but at least you know there are control methods for the larval and pupal stages of the mosquitoes, and you just need to be careful when performing these types of applications. When it comes to the control of adult mosquitoes, when we get to this step of IPM, you're going to be looking at products like pyrethrins, pyrethroids, and organophosphates. I think most everybody these days is using more of the pyrethrins and pyrethroids, but just keep in mind there's a wide variety of products you can use, and it's definitely something that can be a major part of a mosquito control program. There's also other types of control systems for mosquitoes, especially adult mosquitoes, like mosquito misting systems that use botanicals that shoot a mist onto the property, as well as things like mosquito magnets that attract the adult mosquitoes with carbon dioxide. So keep in mind, you really need to keep up on things like mosquitoes because it's ever changing, the techniques and the products out there. Just like any insects, if you don't keep educating yourself, you're going to get behind in the industry. Another insect that we could use IPM for would be centipedes. Reduction in the population of household centipedes happens when other household pests, basically their food source, is reduced. So as you can imagine, if we're reducing their food source, because centipedes do feed on other insects, we're going to be knocking out the centipede population as well. You reduce their food source, they're not going to have anything to eat, they're not going to last really long. Also, airing out damp places has been known to help. These would probably be like crawl spaces underneath houses, things like that. And outdoors, control is aided by removing debris, which gives them harborage with ideal conditions. So as you can imagine, if you've got a bunch of firewood stacked around the house, things like that, an area where it's going to stay wet and moist, you're definitely going to have to worry about a centipede problem. So there's a lot of corrective measures, habitat modification you can use that works hand in hand with IPM for centipedes. It seems like it wouldn't make sense to talk about IPM for centipedes without talking about millipedes. Obviously, as you can imagine, we've got some steps for IPM for millipedes as well. This would include sealing cracks and other openings to the outside. This helps prevent millipedes from getting in. Reducing moist areas around the home, around the perimeter, especially outside, will help kill or discourage millipedes. Things you could specifically do outdoors is removing rotting wood and decaying grass. This is very helpful. Removal of leaves around the home's foundation can definitely aid in control. Excessive moisture in subfloor crawl spaces also provides excellent habitat for millipedes. Corrective measures to dry out these areas can aid in population reduction. And when we talk about that, we're talking about things like laying a vapor barrier in a crawl space, maybe even a crawl space encapsulation. I know that's a lot to think about when you're just looking at reducing millipedes, but services such as crawl space encapsulations and vapor barriers can have a big impact on insects in general inside of a home. Also even things like termites, which we're going to talk about in a few. But keep in mind too, these are steps you can look at reducing moisture, because that's going to be one of the biggest things with millipedes. They just love moist areas, and if you got a lot of moist areas, you can definitely have a problem with millipedes wandering in the house on occasion. Here's another interesting insect to look at the IPM on. Let's talk about IPM for scorpions. Conducting an inspection in or around a structure at night using a black light helps to find them. Find and see any gaps or crevices in exterior walls, repair leaky air conditioners or other outside water sources, prune trees and shrubs up and away from the ground, remove leaf litter, large mulch, debris, and other harborage around buildings, install tight-fitting screens and weather stripping around windows and doors. Termites. Survey structure and surrounding area for signs of termite infestation. Identify species of termite infesting the structure or in the vicinity. Remedy conditions allowing subterranean and Formosan termites access to the structure, wood ground contact, wooden fences against building, vegetation against building, cracks in foundation, etc. When it comes to surveying or inspecting a structure for termites, think about the type of construction you're dealing with. As you can see here, we inspected a log home. There's a lot of issues related to that. I'm sure if any of you have ever inspected a log home, you've probably found termites. I can tell you on a regular basis, this has happened to me. So take into account the type of construction and also the area of the country you're in. This home is in Tampa, Florida, so obviously in a subtropical environment where we have high humidity and a lot of moisture, termites can be a big issue. But think about the types of termites that can be in a certain area as well. Here in this area, we have subterranean, we have Formosan subterranean, and we have drywood. That adds a whole new twist to inspecting for termites, as opposed to inspecting somewhere like Ohio, where you do have fairly common subterranean, but you would never see a drywood termite. Here's another home we inspected we thought was kind of interesting. With this current home, you can see we've got multiple types of construction. We've got a brick part of the foundation. We've got an addition that's just wood. It's older, kind of weathered wood. This just presents a whole nother list of issues. You can also see up at the top, the fascia board is exposed to the elements. So you can see a lot of issues with this. So can you imagine the amount of time you would need to spend doing this termite inspection? I'm going to say that if you do a really good inspection here, unless this has been treated, you're probably going to find evidence of termites on this property. Now you may have to decide if it's old evidence or new evidence, if it's active or not, but I'm going to say there's been termite activity on this property at some point. In the current image, you can see we're inspecting a home with old wood siding. You can also see that the paint was flaking away, and it probably wouldn't surprise you that we found drywood termites on this home. One thing we found in a spider web really close to the spot you're seeing by the light was a drywood termite swarmer. So you need to look for things like that, like swarming termites that may get caught in spider webs. Now, it wasn't even the time of the year that these type of termites would be swarming. It was actually in the winter. But because we looked around the adjacent area, we found the swarming termite, and then we noticed some kick-out holes in the wood. So always think when you're doing your survey and inspection to look at all the adjacent areas where you think there could be termite activity. During an inspection on the image shown in your screen, we found a termite tube coming down a garage wall from a ceiling where there had been a leak. So once again, thinking about integrated pest management, if we've got an area like this where we got a leak coming down from a ceiling area, obviously originating at the roof line, we really can't even solve this termite problem. Can we put out termiticides? Can we try to attack them? Yes, but you really got to solve that leak before you're going to solve the problem. In another instance of finding termites in a garage, this time we found them at an expansion joint. So this is where the garage slab meets the block foundation going into the home. As you can see, there's a nice little subterranean termite coming right up from that expansion joint. Just remember, termites only need 1/64 of an inch to come up, so these expansion joints are very common areas for termites to come up and find access to the inside of the structure. In the instance you can see on the screen, we found termites in a crawl space. This was really tricky because the crawl space had blown on cellulose insulation on the walls, and we actually had to remove it to do a termite inspection. At least we had to move a few inches of it, as you can see, and that's how we found the termites. But it would have been really easy to miss these termites. And when we talk about IPM, identification and finding the problem, some of the biggest things, so sometimes you have to remove obstacles to be able to get to where you want to see. On the current image, you can see we actually found termites in a basement wall here. So this is where two foundation areas met, two block walls, and the termites had worked their way in between. So keep in mind, basements can also be an issue for termites, and you always need to look in those areas as well. It's been stated by many professionals at universities that termites can live 18 to 20 feet below ground. That's another reason why when we're talking about basements, you really need to understand that just because the footer's low doesn't mean the termites won't go down that low. Also, you have to understand that the walls themselves are not nearly as far below grade as the footer or the slab at the bottom. So, of course, the termites could come in any area where there's a little crack in the foundation. In the instance you can see on the screen, we found drywood termites in an attic. These termites had hollowed areas out of the trusses up in the attic, and you can see how they're cleanly shaven. And there was also droppings, pellets below, but I just wanted to mention that termites can be a problem in an attic. This includes drywood and subterranean termites. You need to know the geography of where you're at, and you need to understand what types of termites are in your area so you know exactly what you're looking at when you see things like this. Termites. Consider treating exposed boards in attic and or crawl space with a registered borate. Check moisture levels in walls and in crawl areas. Eliminate excessive moisture sources. Check lawn sprinklers to make sure water direction is not hitting the structure. Check sprinklers to identify faulty shut-off valves that allow water to continually seep. Rats. Survey for rats and rat signs. Place tracking patches to monitor for activity. Seal all openings greater than 1/4 of an inch. Place metal shields on wires to building. Place rat exclusion shield in toilets. Rats. Place grates or hardware cloth with openings of 1/4 inch or less over drains. Place all boxes in storage at least 12 inches from wall and off the floor on pallets. Store food in rat-proof containers. Eliminate free water sources. Rats. Remove shrubbery, vines, and tall vegetation against building. Trim tree limbs away from building. Remove debris that may harbor rats. Rats. For areas with heavy movement of rats from surrounding areas, use paraffin bait blocks and tamper-resistant bait boxes placed outside along protected travel routes. Place all garbage in rat-proof containers. Place screens or hardware cloth over vents. Rats. Keep doors and windows closed when not in use. Place repeating rat traps adjacent to doors that may remain open for prolonged periods. Use snap traps or glue boards at 20 to 30 foot intervals along walls where rats travel. Rats. Inspect regularly to remove trapped rats and for presence of fresh rat signs. If sanitation, exclusion, and trapping fail to control rodents, add use of rodenticide baits and tamper-resistant bait boxes. Rats. If rats will not accept baits, place tracking powder in accessible rat travel lanes if appropriate for the site. If all moisture sources can be eliminated, liquid tox can be mixed with water and placed in locked bait boxes in inaccessible areas. Mice. Survey for mice and signs of mouse infestations. Seal all openings greater than 1/4 inch. Place all boxes in storage at least 12 inches from wall and off the floor on pallets or shelving. Store food in mouse-proof containers. Mice. Eliminate free water sources. Trim tree limbs away from building. Remove debris that may harbor mice. Place all garbage in mouse-proof containers. Place screens over vents. Keep doors and windows closed when not in use. Mice. Place repeating mouse traps adjacent to doors that may remain open for prolonged periods. Use snap traps or glue boards at 10-foot intervals along the walls where mice travel. Inspect regularly to remove trapped rats and for presence of fresh mouse signs. Mice. If sanitation, exclusion, and trapping fail to control mice, add use of rodenticide baits and tamper-resistant bait boxes. If all moisture sources can be eliminated, Liquitox can be mixed with water and placed in locked bait boxes in inaccessible areas. Congratulations, you have completed the course. You are ready to take the quiz and receive your credit. We appreciate your business. Please send any comments on the course to pestceus@gmail.com.